So, hello everybody. Welcome back. Um, as some of you, most of you know, I'm Elizabeth Clark Husters, and I'm here to introduce Zoe to you. Zoe is a dancer, choreographer, theater maker person. And my connection to Zoe is I met her through my daughter, was also a member of the House of Melody, which was the first German ballroom house. And so this is how I met Zoe. And I didn't know all the different kinds of work she was doing that went far, far beyond ballroom and very, very much involved with Black identity in and through dance and movement. Now, that sounds very, very general. So I'm going to just ask Zoe to give a short, short sketch of how she got to where she is.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, like you said, we know each other through your daughter, who is one of my closest friends, Sophie. My name is Zoe. I am an interdisciplinary performance artist and a curator. Interdisciplinary because I couldn't choose what I like most. I started out as a dancer, so I actually started out as a hip hop dancer. Like I did hip hop and all the other stuff connecting to that. So I did locking, popping, house, had a little breaking phase and crump. But I ended up actually exploring or meeting voguing and ballroom culture. I think it was in 2008. And because there was nothing here in Germany, in 2012, I got to meet five other individuals and we formed a group, the House of Melody, and we started to push the culture, travel, and building community here in Germany. And through that, I also got to know Sophie. And yes, I actually, when we met, I wasn't where I am now. So, I think it was 2016 or something. And that was when I started also my stage career as a theater performer and later on theater producer. So I was first in a company, Mouvoir, where I did as a performer, and we did a piece, for example, about the question if we are really past colonialism, and also how the dynamics of cultural appropriation affect specific African countries. It was a Kenyan and German production, and we toured with this. And afterwards, I was like, okay, maybe I should do theater. Maybe that is my thing. And I started out to do my own theater production, which mostly would talk about rehabilitation and the reappropriation of body and space and the dynamic between marginalization and power. Yes. So this is what I do mostly in my art.
Yeah, those very light subjects.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and at the moment, I know that you're working on another project which is taking you far from Germany.
Yes, exactly.
And yeah, we would like to know more about this. And I know that you've prepared something for us.
Yeah.
So I guess I can just say the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I don't know if this keynote is a bit too long. We will see how far we come. Maybe it's not too long. And also, second of all, I'm not a native speaker, so if I have trouble finding the right words, please bear with me. I will share my screen now with you. Um, and open up the presentation. So, like I said, I'm a performance artist, and currently I have the huge privilege to be in a research project, which is called Yovo Yovo Memoir. It is a collaborative research which I actually do with Sophie, with Yukiko. It is our first research that we are doing together, but actually we wanted to do this for like, I think 7 years now. And we finally had the ideas and the fundings, the financial support to do it. So this research is funded by Kunststiftung NRW, Goethe-Institut, Frauenkulturbüro NRW, and supported by Tanzhaus NRW and Theatermuseum. So it's backed by a lot of institutions. Very lucky to do that. Before I get into that, I mean, I briefly talked about this, but I wanted to revisit a bit what I've done so far, so you better understand why I am doing this now. Um, I started out as a performer for other choreographers, but I ended up being a producer myself for artistic projects. And I mostly explore the intersection of spiritual and magical practices and the dynamics between power and marginalization. In my first solo theatre piece, I explored the dynamics of the witch hunts and the archetype of the witch, because actually it was came out of an argument with my ex-boyfriend, who was also like, but hashtag me too is such a witch hunt. And I was like, getting like freaked out and outraged over this, because this comparison was made a lot, not only by like regular men, but by I don't know, politicians, the media, and everybody. So I was like, okay, let me teach you what the witch hunt was actually about, and also how the dynamic of the witch hunt, the the scapegoating of marginalized bodies, how it still unfolds until today, you know, like the legacy of it. I mean, even really recent day. And also, I drew the parallels through colonialism and the tactics and dynamics they used to divide and conquer communities and detach them from their spiritual belief. Apart from theatre makings, I do sometimes collaborative works with other artists where I choreograph, and it's always about the topic of body and space and how we can claim space and expand it so we all fit in. And yeah, what you can also see here is me being at a ball, because I started out as a ballroom performer. I was one of the first people in Germany to walk balls and to establish ballroom alongside other individuals. And 12 years later, I'm still here. I'm still walking balls. Because once in a while, yeah, it's good to step on the floor and to battle and let it all out. So, but what I'm doing, or what I'm here for today, is to speak about why I'm doing Yovo Yovo Memoir and what it actually means. So, I wanted to start out with a memory or an impression that I had after I went to Benin for the first time. Yeah, without further ado, I'm just gonna read it for you all. The children in Benin, my father's country of origin, always shouted a song after me when they saw me on the street. Yovo, yovo, bonsoir, ça va bien, merci. When I asked my father what yovo meant, he replied, it means white. I was shocked. I was read as white, European, privileged, foreign. Again, I was different. Again, I was not belonging. My first trip to Benin, my father's home country, in 2016 was overwhelming and still resonates today. I was flooded with information, impressions, and feelings that I could neither categorize nor process cognitively. And yet my body remembered this place, where it had never been before in this form. The memory was more emotional and physical and spiritual. I understood the dances and melodies, the rhythms and sounds. I was in touch with the earth beneath my feet. Everything was strange and at the same time deeply familiar. Participating in the rituals of the Wundun intensified these feelings. It was alienating yet accessible. It was grounding yet transcending. This is your culture. You have a right to it, were my father's words when he took me to the ceremonies for the first time to introduce me to the customs, dances, songs, and spirits. But how do you justify belonging to and claiming ownership over a culture? Through origin, through conditioning and socialization, through embodiment, or through emotional and spiritual resonance? So these questions stuck with me afterwards, because to get to know more about why is I didn't grow up with my father. I didn't get to know him until I was 25. And I grew up with my mother, who's a white woman in a white household in a predominantly white country. So there was always a feeling of being different, apart from looking different, but also having different desires than the rest of my family, because my family also didn't have any specific cultural or religious practice, maybe apart from going to church on Christmas. So, and I always had a very, very strong desire to have a spiritual practice and also for culture, for artistic expression. And I think my gateway into culture was in the early 2000s through hip hop culture and later on through ballroom. And this was the first time where I actually felt like I I belonged and it resonated with my body, and I could feel like-minded, I could meet like-minded spirits and people and that shared not the same but similar experiences for me. Like people from all kinds of diasporic experiences came together and did what we thought would be hip hop culture, but in a German context. So, and then coming to Benin, I was amazed by how, on one side, I felt like, oh my goodness, everything here feels familiar and feels like very much more like what I am, you know, the way the lifestyle and the way that cultural practices and spiritual interactions are just normally integrated into daily life. And on the other side, I was also amazed by how much reminded me of ballroom and hip hop culture. You know, that I saw so many similar things in form and structure and interaction, that it was like it feels like I am at a ball when I went to a voodoo ceremony. But of course, it was just my own very subjective impressions, and I'm not a scientist, so I was like, I don't with this project, I don't aim to prove anything scientifically. I just try to explore and observe, and you know, what I'm personally interested in. So just to so that nobody will be like, okay, but scientifically this is not like this and that. So yeah, but still, I feel there's an importance to the project that goes beyond me, because obviously me as a African diasporic woman I'm not the only person that feels like this, you know, that sees a connection between different cultural practices. So, oop, no, it was the wrong side. Okay, so this is me and Sophie at the airport before we went to Benin, not knowing what was lying ahead of us. So the research project is auto-ethnographical, which means we explore our own identity, our own history, and try to translate and connect it to what we see and what we observe. It aims to find the field of tension and intersection between different artistic practices of specifically Black communities, but from an African American European diasporic perspective. Because yeah, Sophie is your daughter, Elizabeth, so she's African American European, and I'm African European. So we share very similar things, but also some things are very different from how we grew up, for example. Yes, but still, Sophie and me, we both met in this place, in the ballroom community, both sharing a similar longing and desire to find a place to call home, maybe, you know, because we grew up between continents, between races, between cultures. So it was always like, okay, let's just find our own space to claim. Um, so yes. So we want to explore the transformation of West African cultural practices, is specifically voodoo culture. Why voodoo is something I will explain later on. but like more in more depth. But voodoo is the culture, the dominant culture in Benin. And Benin used to be, before it was called Benin, used to be a kingdom, the kingdom of Dahomey, together with Nigeria. And the Dahomeyan kingdom was like the center stage for the transatlantic slave trade. Therefore, voodoo culture was like the dominant culture and would, through that, through that era and in that time, passed on within within the context of the transatlantic slave trade. Some things that beyond that, beyond proving that this is the case, what we feel is what we feel like we are observing is we want to gain a deeper understanding of the history and the forms of Afro-diasporic art and culture, but also as a German artist or as German artists that don't have an academic, that are not academically trained, because Sophie and me both, we don't have an art degree. It is important for us to show and prove the value of the stories that we want to tell through our art, and also the ways how we want to tell them, because we don't have we even though we don't have academical training, we still have training and we still have knowledge and skills that we gained through our over the past years, through our learning and traveling and exploring. And also beyond us, for non-academic art forms that emerge from Black culture, I think it's important that the results of our research could form an archive for the German-speaking world, because in German bureaucracy, it's very hard still. On the one side, you have cultural institutions and like commercial corporates that like to exploit, decorate, appropriate Black aesthetics and the sound, for example, of ballroom culture, the aesthetic and the language. But again, the community is never invited or is rarely invited. So we feel like there is a disbalance here. And we hope by proving and by with our work that this balance could be shifted a bit, and that we meet more on eye level with cultural institutions. So here you have, I don't know, can you see the imagery? There is on the left side, two performers walking the bizarre category, which is a category in ballroom. And on the right side, you see two performers performing an egungun dance in Huida. So the egungun dance is a dance that is part of the Yoruba and Voodoo culture. The performers are priests or priestess, and they perform a ritual where they get into a trance, and they put on the costume. And it's very important that the costume has an inhuman shape, so you cannot see the shape and form. So they become spirit and they embody them, and they then enchant and entertain the crown. But they're also mediators between this world and the spirit world. And the bizarre category has a bit of a similar approach. So it's also very important to get into a costume that is like that you shapeshift, that you cannot see the human form anymore, and that you therefore mesmerize and enchant the crowd. And I remember for the first time when I saw Egungun, I was like, this looks so much like the bizarre category. Also, the whole form is always like a square, the crowd is around, everybody's like chanting and hyping them up, and they dance and perform in this costume. And I was like, okay, am I projecting, or is this maybe connected? Because there's no real proof. But I was like, okay, let me just act as if they were connected. So from there, so this was like one of the things that I feel that I saw, that I observed, where like, okay, I see same or similar forms, I see similar shapes, I see similar practices, and the way people interact with each other, the way people hype each other, the way it is always a communal practice. So I was like, okay, maybe it is really connected. But before we could, when we started our research, we decided that we would go first to Benin to examine and to understand the culture better, because, and this was also something that appeared to me the first time before I went to Benin for the first time, because I was like coming back to my personal story. I felt like in 2016, I was stuck in a place. I couldn't really go further. Like I was like, okay, where do I want to go with my career? Where do I want to go with my art? I don't really know. I felt like, I don't know, standing in the fog. And I did meditation. And the sentence of to know where you're going, you must first know where you come from appeared to me in this meditation. I was like, okay, maybe it's time to go to Benin for the first time because I was always too scared to do that and to confront my past and meet my father and meet my family. But I knew if I want to go further in life, I have to revisit and understand where I'm coming from and my heritage, my ancestry. So this was also for this research the case. So that's why we went to Benin and explore the voodoo culture. This is me and Sophie sitting at a compound after we did our first voodoo ritual. So this was also already after a few days. Yeah, it was for the both of us very important because for different reasons. Obviously, for me because of the link to my father, but for Sophie because also as she is a descendant of African American and also therefore a descendant of the Mafa, it was important for her also to understand where she's coming from and what her ancestors have endured also to understand herself better. And we were like, okay, this is going to be a very tough and emotional journey also for the both of us for different reasons, but we want to do this together. Yeah, at that point, we didn't know how intense it would be, but we were, even now that it's over, we are very glad that we did this together so we could hold space for each other and be each other's witness through this. But it was very deep and very insightful, which you will understand maybe, hopefully, later. So, starting out our research, we met a mythology professor. I wrote his name down somewhere. His name is Da Joma Musu, and he's like an expert on voodoo because we first wanted to get some theoretical knowledge about what is voodoo actually about. Because when you grow up, I mean, I think all of us did this voodoo. I mean, the spelling is voodoo, but it's actually connected to voodoo or hoodoo. And I think all of us were fed with like pop culture and Hollywood images of like dolls and, like bloody rituals and demons and everything and zombies. And we were like, okay, but there has to be more to it, right? So we want to understand what voodoo really is and also why it is so demonized or why it has been demonized. So voodoo, the cosmology of voodoo is actually always a principle of balance. So it's always about keeping opposite forces and principles in balance. So you have, for example, the deities in voodoo. You have a cosmology with a lot of deities, and they always complement each other. They always balance each other out. And also, us as humans and the afterworld or the immaterial world, we also coexist in a relationship that always is asking to be in balance. So if something is not in balance, we will feel it in our real world. Um, the aspects of voodoo include dancing, drumming, singing, chanting, clothes, food, medical treatment, divination, such as like oracle, asking an oracle if there's something going on, trance, and offerings. It is a community practice, and it's believed that the more people take part in a ritual or a ceremony, the more the power increases, and also everybody that is participating will receive the blessings of the ritual. So here comes the a bit scary if you don't understand it part of voodoo. If you want to interact with a voodoo deity, the voodoo gods always demand blood. And this is also what scared the colonizers off when they first interacted and experienced voodoo rituals. Um, if you want something from the gods, you got to offer and sacrifice something. And what they desire most is blood. Blood, because it represents life and vitality, and it's the driving force. So it's said that in voodoo belief, it's said that our soul lies in our blood. So as long as our blood pumps, we have soul in our heart. And the moment, for example, when we are birthed, the spirit is entering our body, and then all of us have a spirit that is accompanying us and protecting us, or like making sure that we receive blessings and wealth and stay healthy. So also there you have this duality, you have this relationship that needs to be in balance. You always need to be in a good relationship with your protective spirit. Yes, and therefore, if you want something from a specific deity or god, you gotta sacrifice. It's not always blood, but most gods are very bloody. So yeah, this is something that we weren't aware of, that it's always like this. But yeah, it's also, if you look at other religious beliefs, blood sacrifice, like animal sacrifice, has always been a thing, even in Christianity, in Islam, in Judaism. It was, at certain point it may have been abolished, but it also in antique religion. It has always been a thing, but voodoo remained that. Yeah, in voodoo it remained like the predominant practice if you do a sacrificial ritual. Um, Something that is very important in voodoo is you cannot touch someone's crown before touching their root. What that means is you have the cosmology of voodoo says that there was like one creator god that gave birth to the universe, and the universe being said Mavu and Lisa. Mavu Lisa is a twin god, sometimes also depicted as mother and son, sometimes also depicted as a couple, and this twin god gave birth to heaven and earth, to sun and moon, to water and fire. So it's also a complementary relationship. And the children of Mavulisa are assigned to different elements and materials, and are basically representing the children of Mavulisa are like all the children of the voodoo. And depending on who you ask, there are like 80 to 500 voodoo gods, depending on in which region do you ask the experts. Um, the if you have so the hierarchy is you have Mavulisa as like the superior creator gods. Then you have the children that represent elements and materials, for example, metal or fire or earth or water or the ocean. Then you have protective deities, patrons and matrons, who would in a Western context be called saints. So you have saints. And then saints would be, for example, former kings who were very powerful, or priests or priestesses who served a deity their whole life and were then accepted into the circle of the god because they have always worshipped the gods. And below that, you have just people who passed away and then became ancestors in the afterlife. And in the philosophy of voodoo, you always have to honor your ancestors first before you want to honor before you honor and worship a god. That's why the saying, before touch someone's crown, you have always touched the root. So the connection to God goes through the root. It's always through the earth, and this is the philosophy of voodoo. Generally, the connection between, also, if you, for example, if you are in a ritual, in a dance ritual, it's always connected to stomping through the earth, on the earth, because you awaken the spirit and you awaken your ancestors before you do anything else. Voodoo has no religious authority. It is no institution. It has no book, no church, and no dogma. It embraces multiple gods and multiple traditions, such as divination through oracles. And it has diverse cosmologies, which was something that I had a hard time to understand, because I thought, okay, you have this one pantheon of gods, like 20 gods, and that's there is. But depending on where you are, if you go a little bit more north or northwest, or like to Nigeria or to, Mali, you may find things that are also called voodoo, but they have like some gods that the Beninois people also have, but they included some other gods. And for them, it's not like no, there is one universal truth and this is the only truth and the only way to practice this. Is like, no, we just include what is strengthening the culture and the practice. And therefore, the religion observes what is strengthening, what strengthens it. And therefore, when the missionaries arrived and were like, okay, wait, what are you doing here? But Christianity is the one and only religious belief. The voodoo practitioners were like, okay, we're just gonna include your practice, we're just gonna coexist. And so, from the side of voodoo religion, it was possible to coexist and to even merge. From the side of Christianity, it was not, because it was believed to be the only true religion. And even until today, if you go to Benin, most people practice both, and there's a saying like, in the mornings you go to church, in the evening you pray to the voodoo gods. So it's like you do both. It doesn't exclude one another, even though it's a very different belief. And this concept of religion is very contrary, I think, to Northwestern religion, but to me, therefore, felt a bit more close to how I view religion and spiritual practice. Um, Something that we were personally very interested in was the comparison and the connection between witchcraft and voodoo, because when Christian missionaries came and they demonized it, and they saw very similar practices through from voodoo to paganism, to what has been the religious belief that was dominant in Europe before Christianity, because of ancestor worship that was also part of paganism, interaction with multiple deities and nature spirit, and sacrificial rituals, and dance and trance and drumming. And also the European witch hunt, according to Silvia Federici, one of a very highly decorated feminist social scientist. She claimed that the European witch hunt shortly preceded the era of colonialism and used similar tactics and instruments of power in order to disconnect people and conquest their land, colonize it, scapegoat it, divide communities, and establish a hierarchy based on race, gender, class, and religious authority. Um, knowing this, I assumed that witchcraft would be a term that was not included into voodoo, or was like, how do you say, abgelehnt? Ab
Rejected.
Rejected, would have been rejected. But actually, even witchcraft, it is a highly polarizing term, and it's a very controversial thing to practice. But witchcraft has just been included into voodoo, so the term is there. It is part of voodoo. It is not, you cannot really distinguish, okay, where does voodoo end and where does witchcraft begins, because also in the local language you don't have a term for witchcraft, so you can assume it is just the term was appropriated from the colonizer language. And instead of distancing themselves, it was just integrated. And to call somebody a witch or a witch doctor is not necessarily a bad thing. It just, before any judgment, means that somebody possesses very great spiritual power, can interact with the spirit world, and has power that can either harm or heal a person. So, and since Sophie and me both were very coming from a very feminist belief, therefore we're very interested in the concept of witches and witchcraft. We thought that was very interesting, that this is just, has just like everything else, it was just included and merged into voodoo. So after the whole theoretical part, getting to know a lot about the cultural practice from a theoretical point, we went on actually have a voodoo ritual with the mythology professor, which was also interesting because we were a bit, okay, skeptical is the wrong word. I think mm, yeah, we didn't really know what to expect, you know, because and it was very different from what we expected, not in terms of how it went down, but it was first of all, it was a very, very long ritual. You go through a compound with different deities. You have like drums, bells and drumming the whole time, and the whole time a priest that is chanting. And it is crazy that at some point you really start to get into a into a trance-like zone. Either you cannot really fight it. It's just because of the continuation of the rhythms and the chanting, your channels are really opening up to it, and it's a very transcending experience. And even though it's also a bloody experience because there are animal sacrifice, it was crazy to see how that there was like no disgust or no strange feeling to it. It just felt like a very natural and sacred experience, especially because after the sacrifice, we all sat down and we prepared a meal. We cooked the chicken and we ate it and we made prayers. So it was really like also a practice of gratitude towards what just happened, what this animal just did to us, and we now consuming this energy in a moment of community, you know, under really under the stars, because it was like night at the time we were finished. So I was also like, okay, you know, sitting down having food together after such an intense ritual felt like a very sacred moment. Yeah. So after that experience, we went to visit the Voodoo Days. Originally, we just wanted to go to Benin during that time because there is the Voodoo holiday on the 10th of January. But what I wasn't aware of that since last year, there's not only a holiday, but a whole festival around the Voodoo Days. So we're like, okay, let's go. And we went between the 9th and 10th of January to Huida, something I can highly recommend to everybody. We went to see the sacred forest, which is like a place where the priests gather to make their sacrifices and rituals. It is also a museum. We went to the Python temple, a temple where you can enter, and there are like hundreds of pythons, like snakes lying everywhere, but they are very peaceful. And I I'm actually highly anxious of snakes, but I cured that. They cured me. And yeah, there was also a very beautiful experience. But we also get to go to the gate of no return, which is like the place that people that were raided and imprisoned had to pass through in order to enter the ships and go to the new world. Um, the Voodoo Days, yeah, are since 2 years celebrated by in Huida, which is the coast city. It used to be a vassal state of the Dahomey Kingdom and played a major role in the transatlantic slave trade. Because Huida was home of one of the largest slave markets in West Africa, if not all Africa. And in the enslaved people endured brutal ordeals before being sold. I will spare you the details on this. But it was for us a very I will not say for that it was a painful experience for me, but I was just in shock. Even though you know about this and you read about this, but to be there and then listen to somebody explaining you and really putting you through the steps that happened, I was like, okay, this was just a very, very cruel period and very dark time. And I'm also getting, I don't know, I just felt enraged at some point. I'm like, if we still, I mean, I don't know how it is these days in America, but knowing, for example, that from the discourse here, that people are like, yeah, colonialism is over, but slavery, it is like long gone. Let's get over it. I'm like, oh, we barely scratched the surface, even in Africa, because the moment we start talking about this, an argument happened between my father and the tour guide, and you could really see that even between the tribes, there is still a huge conflict over that period of time, because obviously it was not only the Europeans that made this happen. The Kingdom of Dahomey made this happen as well. They were the ones raiding villages and selling them to the Europeans for them then to sell them further to Brazil, Haiti, the Caribbeans, or North and South America. So there was a participation of the Dahomean kingdom, which is not really aufgearbeitet. Aufgearbeitet again?
Resolved.
Resolved, yeah, not at all, really. So we were just standing at this spot of the slave market, and basically it was just the tour guide, my dad, and me yelling at each other and starting a huge argument. And Sophie at some point was like, "Okay, guys, I'm the only one that actually was affected by this. Could you all just calm down now and please stop yelling at each other?" So it was just very
Joy, if you can hear me, you were stuck. It seems your video is stuck and we cannot hear you.
Oops.
I'm sure she'll log right back in.
Well, let's hope. This is very, very interesting and very, very um, rich
And
knowledge which is imparting to us. Um, maybe this is the moment to say if you have questions, then please put them in the question and answer box, and we will get to them as we can when Zoe finishes with her presentation.
I'm back.
Ah, there you are.
Okay, I don't know what happened. My internet wasn't having it.
Um, we lost you right after Sophie said that she's the only one who was affected by this.
Exactly. Yeah, she was giving us yeah, she was ending the conflict by like, okay, you all need to calm down because I'm the only one affected by this, and if somebody should get emotional about this, it should be me. Anyway, but it was still all of this really played also an important part later on into our research to see we all really come from like all narratives are just narratives, all things are just perspectives because the written history just tells us one perspective because we were standing there talking about this topic and we all had very different information on it and were like emotionally affected in different ways by it. So yeah, it was in the aftermath, looking back at it, I was like, okay, this was a very intense but also interesting moment. And generally coming back to the voodoo days, and that's why I also recommend them to go there because apart obviously from the painful aspects of revisiting the whole history and like walking the the slave road and visiting the slave market, it is still these days. One second, I need to like today a lot of people from like the African diaspora, especially Haiti, the Caribbeans and North and South America, pilgrimage to Huida to just reconnect and also to observe where they're coming from. Basically Same like us, they are seeking the connections to their ancestors, to spiritual practices, and to their cultural roots. Um, yes, this is just the image that you see here. On the left, you see the gate of no return, which is, it has been rebuilt. It didn't used to look like this, but now it's like more monument to remember. And here in the back, you can see the mass grave, where we went and also sent our prayers, because those who didn't survive the torture before even entering the slave market, those who were raided and were like captured by the Dahomean kingdom and didn't survive that act, were just thrown into this mass grave, which is like a few hundred square meters big, and like I think 12 meters deep. So it's a very huge grave. And if you count the victims of the transatlantic slave trades, these people are not included. So we don't really know how many bodies lie there that didn't even make it until the point of being traded. So it's just unimaginable, and nobody really knows the true numbers. Um, and yes, the to get more into, like, to get a bit more insights on the numbers and what actually happened. The Kingdom of Dahomey was a central force in the transatlantic slave trade from the 16th to 19th century. And it was raiding villages, and some were like and conquered other kingdoms. For example, Huida used to be a kingdom, but then it was conquered by Dahomey, and they either kept the captives as slaves. For example, the parents, the great parents of my grandmother and all of her ancestors were also kept as slaves, but they were freed just by a lucky incident. So it was just luck that they were not sold abroad. So they either kept them or they sold them to the Europeans, and some were freed, but then forced to become citizens and be of service to the Dahomean kingdom. For example, my grandmother comes from a village where voodoo was practiced, or where it's said to be a very powerful voodoo that was practiced, and the king was interested in their ways of practicing voodoo and therefore granted them freedom in order for them teaching the court and the royal houses their voodoo practice. This is just a story that my dad told me. I don't have any proof to back that up. But I was anyway, I was just like, okay, maybe that happened, and if that, then it was actually just luck, let's, or maybe not, maybe fate, we don't know. Um, Similar to the European monarchy at that time, the Dahomean royalty were not the common folk were benefiting from the trade. So even though the kingdom was rich, the people were poor, as we know it from kingdoms. And yeah, the impact of the slave trade obviously still affects the descendants until today. Yeah, this is something that also I thought was a very interesting aspect of it, because you also had something, the tree of forgetfulness, you call it today. And it said that people, before they should get sold, that they should need to pass down the circle around the tree of forgetfulness in order to forget who they were, their identity, and their cultural and spiritual practices. So this was something that was very important for us, because the whole point of going to Benin was to remember, was Yovo Yovo memoir, it was all about like remember who we are, remember where we are coming from, and also remembering our cultural customs and spiritual practice before they got colonized. So yeah, for us, we were like at that was a very important point of our journey, to experience that something like this existed and was part of the treatment they had to endure. Um, So going from Huida, after we spent there and witnessed the holiday and did the whole touristic tour, we went to Abomey, the former capital of the Dahomean kingdom, and Abomey claims to be like the origin and birthplace of voodoo. Like the strongest voodoo can be found in Abomey, but obviously every city claims that. We went to Abomey, and that was a very I would say it was a breaking point in our journey because on one hand, for me it felt like homecoming because Abomey was also the hometown of my dad. So going there, I always get to meet my whole family, visiting the graves of my grandfather and my grandmother, going to the pantheon of my grandmother because my grandmother was a very highly decorated voodoo priest and she had her own pantheon. And at the same time, for Sophie, it was a very different experience because it was important. We felt the importance of heritage and status and ancestral bloodline because my dad, wherever we went, was like, this is my daughter. She's the granddaughter of BGHRA, which is the name of my grandmother. And it was crazy how when they don't know that, they just see a white girl. But when they know that I'm the grandmother of that specific high priestess, I get embraced and welcomed everywhere. So status and lineage is very, very important. Um, Yes. So, talking about the social dynamics about in Voodoo or in Benin is also something that I thought is very interesting. It's because you both have even though patriarchy is like the social dynamic and the social system that is established, matriarchy still exists, especially in Voodoo, because the most powerful priestesses are always said to be women in voodoo belief. It's said that women have it is for women it is easier to access the spiritual realms, to communicate with gods, but still the political power is solely exclusively for men. So men might have like 5 spiritual advisors that are always women, but he still gets to make the political or the powerful decisions. My grandmother, I got to know her, fortunately, but she passed down in 2018. She passed in 2018. She was a powerful voodoo priestess of the highest rank, serving the god Sakpata. Sakpata is an earth god and a god for health and disease. Yeah, she was known to be like, she's reached a very high status and she was known to communicate with the gods and put people into trance, which is something that not every priest can do, even though they can reach a high status. Don't ask me how that works. I don't know. I just know that she could do that. Yeah, she served the god and through her ancestral lineage. So she came from that village that was known for worshiping that god and was known for being very powerful in that. And she was also a matriarch because she built and she founded a pantheon, like a huge temple. And she not only raised her biological children, but she also took in other people's children that couldn't provide for them, and she provided for them. And they would then later on become her voodoo children, like serving and worshiping in their pantheon, and also become priestesses. I think it was mostly women that she took in. Also, something that reminded me of ballroom, the dynamic of being founding chosen family under the name of a house that you take in and raise and provide for them. She basically did that. But it is still a man's worth. So, like, there's a strong hierarchy in the Fon culture and in Voodoo, and it is a very male-dominated system that can be predated or can be traced back even before colonialism. So, this is not something the colonial forces enforced on the society. So if you listen to the stories, and this was something that was also very interesting, we wanted to know more about history and historical facts, but it was always tales and narratives about very powerful king I don't know, interact with god-like powers, that could summon thunder and let like the sea storm and like could make it rain, and that would like protect their palaces or burn down their palaces in order to protect it from the colonial forces. And you rarely hear stories from females and from the women of the Benin culture, despite the Dahomey Amazons, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with them. The Dahomey Amazons used to be a all-female army that belonged to the Dahomeyan kingdom. At its prime time, it was 3,000 female warriors, and they fought the colonizers' armies. They even are found in pop culture today because they inspired the Dora Milaje in the Black Panther movies. Yeah, that's why I put the imagery here to compare it for you to see. And since 2017, there is even a huge statue in the capital of Benin to show the Dahomey Amazon, because the government thinks, yeah, they are putting a focus on empowering women and females, and therefore they take great pride in the Dahomey Amazons, since also the world now knows them and therefore knows Benin. It put the country on the map. Yes, something that we're almost at the end of it, something that I wanted to share with you, because it was something that I observed and that I'm still thinking about today, is when we went to a museum, to a museum in, I think it was in Huida. We were observing the statues that we saw, and I remember that at some point my dad, like he usually does, he interrupted the tour guide. And he were like, yeah, this is all very nice what you're saying to us, but these statues are not real voodoo deities. And the tour guide replied, yes, you are right. These are not real voodoo deities. And I was like, yeah, what do you mean with this? And he said, these are just representations, only representations. And do you know how I know that? Because there is no blood. And this was something that stuck with me today, because it is highly contrasting or it shows the contrast of artistic and cultural practice in Europe versus culture versus Africa. Because if you in Europe, for example, you go to a museum, things become valuable and sacred, and through distance, through observing them through a distance behind like plexiglass. Yeah, you always have your 3 meters distance. Nobody can touch them. Nobody can like come near. And in West Africa, it's the opposite. Things become sacred through interactions and through sacrifice. If a community or if a person is not interacting with an artifact, there is no meaning, there is no power and no value through that artifact. And also, this insight stuck with me because of the whole political discourse of returning artifacts to Africa that were stolen over the course of colonization. Because the main argument of, for example, France or England was always like, yeah, we cannot give the artifacts back because you don't have any resources to take care of them. So they're going to stay with us in our museums. But actually, first of all, it is, yeah, it is, I don't know, a very offensive thing to say, that we think that the originator of something don't have the resources to take care of it. And secondly, also a complete colonized approach to think you would have the right resources and knowledge to take care of artifacts, when in fact these artifacts are there for being touched and for being interact with and for being covered with blood or with honey or with sugar or with alcohol or whatever the gods demand for it to actually become sacred and powerful. So yeah, it was because I always felt like like every time, for example, when I was younger, I went to a museum, the thing of the lack of interaction with the art was something that was disturbing to me, like or like where I felt like, okay, I don't really understand this form of cultural practice. And now I'm like, okay, now I know why I don't understand this, because maybe an interaction and a real life interaction feels more close to how I think culture should be practiced. But this is obviously a very personal view. Um, yeah, but this is something that I observed. I'm still thinking on this, but I wanted to include this into my keynote. Yes, coming back to our actual research and what we are originally aim to do, seeing and drawing the lines and connecting the dots of Afro-diasporic culture and the culture of Voodoo and the Fon and the Dahomean kingdom. When I went to a Voodoo show in Abomey, when we arrived in Abomey, I went to a show, and I remember I was sitting there witnessing the spectacle, but to me, it again felt like a ball. It was under the rising full moon, and we were sitting on the edge of a forest, and the stars were shining, and like the performers were like meeting on the sand in the middle of a square, like dancing, drumming, chanting, and they were like it was very ecstatic, and it was also a battle manner. So it was an exchange, but it was also a battle. And the different covens were also coming together. So covens that would serve voodoo gods. You would have covens for Mami Wata, they would dress a certain way. You would have covens for Sakpata, they would dress a certain way. And every coven had their different aesthetic, their different style and costume, their different chant, and their different dances. And they would basically battle. And to me, it was like, okay, I'm at a ball. You have different houses. Every house has their dress code. Every house has their chant. And you have like a commentator, because you also have something like an MC, somebody, but in Voodoo you call it, for example, Honzi, which is like a priest that is also a oral storyteller. And it's like so many things that I was like, it really is familiar, but maybe I'm just projecting. I don't know if it is, it's just something that I see. And some, especially in the culture, I put here the culture of ballroom, but also I don't know if you are familiar with this. Crump culture has similar dynamics. Crump is also, the culture also has fams. You don't call them houses, you call them fams. You have a strong hierarchy. You have like, you all dress in a to show the crew that you belong to. You have like chants, you have like moments of hype and ecstasy, and it is a goal to reach like a trance-like ecstatic moment and momentum in your dance. And this is also the goal when you dance in Voodoo. It's always the goal to dance so much that you reach the trance state, so you can be possessed by the spirit of your coven. So yeah, so this is something, I think this is what I explained now already. So this is our last day in Benin. We were sitting on the feet of the Dahomey Amazon, of the statue. And for us, I think it was a very intense, very emotional journey that didn't give us the insights that we were looking for, but it gave us much more insights we didn't expect to get. um, Yes, and I think the question of how things are being inherited genetically and passed down through bloodlines, but also in Voodoo, it's believed that things are inherited spiritually. So we all inherit the spirit of our ancestors and the spirit that protect us. For example, a priest told me that I inherited the spirit, the gods of my father's side, and even named the gods, the names of the gods, which was crazy because he couldn't have known what god my grandmother served her whole life, and they are like I said, 50 to 500 gods, and he picked the one that my grandmother is serving her whole life. So maybe there's something to it. Anyway, what we figured out is that our blood definitely remembers something, and that our longing in, when we met in Germany, we got to know each other. We met through ballroom community. We both became mothers of houses, basically forming our own covens. We both experienced transcendency and ancestral connection through rhythm and music and dance. And we both practice divination when we are in need of guidance. So our blood definitely remembers. And the longing for community and spiritual practice, and to claim something for ourselves that lies outside of a patriarchal hierarchy, this also is something that our blood remembered. And even though we didn't grow up in this cultural context, or we always grew up between cultural contexts, this way of practicing, or voodoo, the way voodoo was practiced, felt familiar to us, and it also strengthens our bond of sisterhood by choice. Um, yes, and our journey will continue. We will travel to New Orleans in March, actually in 1.5 weeks, to continue our journey and to continue our research, but to observe the American voodoo and also observe the culture of New Orleans as like a diasporic melting pot. And hopefully, or not hopefully, but surely, all that we have observed will become the content of a theater piece that I'm doing under this. I'm being the artistic director, and Sophie is going to be the dramaturgy. And it is basically about, it is an Afrofuturistic tale in the context of the mythology of the god Mabulisa that is here, or Mavulisa, which desires to restore the balance in our world. Yes. Whew.
Oh, Zoe, thank you so much for this. Lots of information, lots of things to think about, lots of things that we can observe, but now observing them on the basis of more information. But there's so much to know. Um, there's so much to know. So I have a few questions which uh, people in the audience have put into the question and answer box. Um, we don't have that much time, so we'll try to get to as much as we can. The first question came when the children in Benin were singing that song. Do you think that when you visited, your expectations of automatic acceptance were too high or relative, and what was the impact of this experience?
I think my expectations weren't too high, but I didn't expect to be viewed as white.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, obviously I knew that it wasn't, I mean, I think a part of me had the desire to experience a homecoming, because growing up, like I said, in a white family, in a white country, until today get othered for, or even though this is my country and I feel German, but I was never viewed as German. So I was like, okay, maybe I will have that feeling when I'm in Benin, or at least a bit more. But in Benin, it was much stronger than in Germany, actually, because Benin is also not a touristic country. You rarely see it. Changed over the past years also, but when I went there, it took me a few days to see another white person or mixed race person. So I didn't expect to be immediately welcomed and included, but definitely didn't expect to be viewed as a white person.
Mm. Another question. If your father had not accompanied you on your tour, how do you think the information and sites you saw, and your insight, how would that have been different?
Oh my God, this is a good question, because this is something basically we we had many arguments about, because my my father accompanying us affected the research a lot, because he's a very dominant person and he has his own ideas of what I should do, what I experience, what I should hear, and he wants to control everything. And yeah, and therefore we have a very close relationship, but also a very complicated one. So I think if he wouldn't have been there, I couldn't have navigated the country, because also of the language barrier. Because first of all, it's a former French colony, so nobody speaks English, and my French is very bad. But even the moment you step outside of the capital, nobody speaks French either, or they only speak the local language. So you need somebody to navigate it. Um, and also, yeah, but then also you had this conflict of interest, that I wanted to experience and explore specific things, and he wanted me to experience and explore other things. So,
Mhm.
but this dynamic then also just became part of the research, to be like, okay, what our ancestors expect from us, but what do the descendants choose to do with it, like, so we were just, okay, this is just material, let's just take it in.
Yeah, like in the spirit of the Vodun, that looking for balance and everything is contained.
Exactly.
Okay, another question. Um, just a second. This is not so much a question as it is an observation. Um, it's interesting the way white women of European ancestry have embraced the concept of witchcraft. For example, the Celtic tradition of Wiccan culture. I think also the more we research, the more we're going to find parallels in other cultures. And that makes me think that human experience is always, we'll always find certain things that are similar because it's human experience. But that's just my thought. I'm going back to the questions that other people asked. Let me see. Okay, we seem to have um, yeah, one participant asked if you can explain your references to ballroom and walking the balls very early in your presentation. However, I'm not sure, but I think that has been explained since this question was put in. There's more information there. But if somebody wants to have more information, where can they go?
I have a website. I can put it in the chat. theartofzoe.com. There you can review my work and also find videos of what I did and trailers and so. And basically, walking balls is just how you say when you participate in a ballroom event or a ballroom battle. You say you walk a ball. Because yeah, you present yourself and you dance, or sometimes depending on the category, it's not only dancing, and it's also a culture that includes fashion or like rapping, I would say, like commentary. And yeah, so this is what I meant by walking a ball. And it's something you don't do to get paid for. It's more for like expression, connection. Like I said, you don't, it's for me, looking back at it, I think it was always a spiritual practice to walk a ball, to like claiming my identity, finding, connecting, reaching a point of ecstasy. So yes.
Mhm. Um, Another question. This is a very educational and experiential presentation. Thank you. How did your German friends, afro-Germans versus white Germans, react to your rational and positive reports of this experience?
So I think it depends on the context. I'm not everybody gets to know all the details of everything because people need context in order to understand what I'm talking about and also what I'm experiencing. Just the aspect of voodoo and ritual and blood sacrifice, not everybody will understand that without immediately like getting scared or like irritated by it. And I think it is and this was also over the course of the journey very important to be like, we're just going to stay open-minded and surrender to whatever this journey has to offer to us. So I'm also approaching my reports like this. If I get the feeling that somebody is open for me to really authentically share how I felt about this, I'm going to share everything. But especially with my Afro-German friends, it's a very different approach because some have, most of my Afro-German friends have very they are very diverse experience in how they connect to ancestry. Some don't want to have anything to do with their families, with their ancestral land, don't want to know anything about that. So therefore, there's like no real interest in this, or like more like of a superficial interest. And some I feel are getting very inspired, and not only my Black friends, even my white friends are like, oh my goodness, I think I need to do like more ancestral research. And a friend of mine, Dominica, for example, the moment I reported her the our research projects, she started to ask all her aunties and uncles about her ancestors and try to draw the line of where she comes from, what was happening, what religious belief were there. So I feel some get very inspired. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a
Another,
question. May I interrupt for a second?
Yes.
yes.
First, I'd like to thank you for this amazing, wonderful talk. I have actually two questions. The first question is because, and piggybacking on what you were just talking about, what does it mean to you to share this experience here with us, with the international community of Black Germans and our friends? That's question number one. And number two, can you, before you go, let us know a little bit about your upcoming trip? I think it's to New Orleans, and how you would like other scholars or people to contact you who might be interested in hosting you and Sophie when you come.
Yes, please. So, okay, I'm going to start with the first question. I think this was the perfect context to reflect on my experiences today, because so far I started to write a report, but I didn't really share everything with everybody. So, and I feel today was my biggest report on what actually happened, because most of the time when people ask me, how was Benin? I'm like, I will tell you one day, because it was also very intense. I came back and I needed to rest a few days, which isn't really possible because I have a 3-year-old daughter, so she didn't really let me rest. But yes, it was, and I think today, like yesterday and today, I was really forced, but it didn't feel like pressure, but I was forced to really sit down and make sense of it all, and also to go through it again, and knowing that this will be heard by people that not only intellectually can understand, but maybe emotionally can understand how this might have been for us. I think this is very important, to find a space that can resonate with what I'm experiencing, even though you guys didn't went with me, but I'm sure some of you could pick some parts where they were like, oh my god, I think I can connect to that, or I can connect to it on a deeper level. So yeah, this for the first part. I think that's why thank you for having me, and for offering this platform to share this experience. And for New Orleans, I would be glad if people would reach out, because for in Benin we had like partners with whom we collaborated, but for New Orleans we don't really have that. We have like some associations where we want to go and do interviews, but there's a lot of space to still like to like empty space to fill in our program. So if anybody knows somebody or happens to be from New Orleans or wants to meet and celebrate Mardi Gras and afterwards work with us, please reach out. I wrote my yes, here my website in the chat, and I think over there you can also find my email address, but let me just
Okay.
type it.
Make sure you're typing to everyone.
Okay. Okay. So
And if
yes.
they're not in New Orleans, if they're elsewhere in the US, are you still interested? Will you have
Of
time?
course, of course, because like I said, I feel even though this research officially will end in April, for me, it won't end there, because it's like a continuation, it's a process, and it's so deeply tied to my identity and to a lot of people's identity. I think I'm always open for exchange, and I'm always open for sharing and exchanging about these topics. And I actually hope to be able maybe next year to do continuation of this research, like with more money and resources. Yes. But yes, hit me up, reach out. I'm really open for this.
Thank you so much. So do you have final words for us before we close and go on to the next talk?
Visit Ruida if you can, if you have the opportunity, the resources, the money, the time. It is a very, very beautiful village. The Voodoo Days are also very beautiful festival. The country overall is very beautiful, despite the painful history, obviously. And yes, I think what I learned most, what I think is most important is the principle to honor balance in our life, in the universe, is something that we can maybe all take with us and learn from the voodoo practice.
And I think since your trip has been so recent, and I know that, and you haven't had a lot of time to tell us all about your responses when you got home, but I know that over the next year, you will have processed a lot of differently and emotionally. So I guess we'll just have to bring you back again to tell us more.
Yes, please. I'm happy to be back anytime.
Alrighty. Thank you so much.
Yes.
It would be
True.
very, very interesting to, after after a year and after working through this in an artistic way, um, to see what are the, to have you back and perhaps with Sophie to see where your experience dovetails and where they are different.
Yes.
Um, I'm fascinated by all of what you have reported, and I hope that we will meet again soon. I mean, I have the advantage because I'm not that far from you, so I can
True.
meet you.
Yes.
But thank you, and thank you,
I
thank you.
just saw that there's another question that I quickly want to answer because I forget about that part of those very important. The question of ballroom culture plays with gender and in really interesting ways, and if I also find that in voodoo as well. Yes, I did, which it was also very exciting to figure that out because voodoo embraces queerness. Like, first of all, Benin is not a queer phobic country. There are no laws against it. Or socially, it's a different topic, like West African men, not to generalize anything, but the social vibe is not very queer friendly, but by law, it is embraced. And in voodoo, it is also embraced. You have even specific covens that take like predominantly women and trans femmes in. So, for example, the Mami Wata coven is known for that AMAPs, so people that are assigned male at birth, come into the coven and then channel female deities. Or even at the voodoo ceremony that I earlier on reported about, was you had like 3 people that were in drag, like yeah, I assume gay men, but wearing bras and like makeup and earrings, performing the rituals with them. And also they played a key role in it. I couldn't really understand what was happening, but queer people and even trans people are very, you don't see a lot, but they are out there, and they have like a specific part in the voodoo cosmology, especially because a lot of voodoo deities are also intersex, transsexual, or they are like bisexual, like, so this is just, it is normal. Like socially, not always accepted, spiritually, it is completely included. Yes. Okay. So that was my final word now.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you
Yes.
again, Zoe and Elizabeth. Bye-bye.
Bye.